From small trowels and camel hair brushes to the big stuff, here's a different kind of excavation, the new Docklands Light Railway. That's being extended from the Isle of Dogs to link up with the City of London and the underground system at Bank Station. Here's site manager Steve Cook.
We're hoping to do a metre an hour once we're into the good conditions. It goes from ground level at this point down to about 40 metres at the deepest point. That's at Bank Station. Well, this particular job, there's a lot of problems with all the existing buildings, of course, and we have to weave our way around all the buildings, which is why the job is actually 94% curved and only 6% straight. That itself is a major problem.
This investment in the light railway is proof that the Isle of Dogs is changing more than anyone could have believed. It's now the biggest building site in Europe and comes complete with pretty lax planning rules because it's an enterprise zone.
This has been a development which has been in an area which for 30 years saw no investment. The land was worthless. You couldn't even pay people to come in and put up buildings here just a few years ago. What you see now around you is an absolute transformation, a miracle of regeneration in the centre city. It's very easy now to say, well, of course it was going to happen, but nobody was saying so at the time and nobody was investing in it.
No one can deny that Docklands was derelict, windswept and run down. Now, with its rebirth, it's a major tourist attraction. But what about the local people? They're complaining there are no new schools, the road system is bad and there's no hospital. Being an enterprise zone, they say that in terms of planning, anything goes. Cascades, and it's got to be one of London's most spectacular addresses. It's also the most controversial. From the outside, you can see why it's on the Prince of Wales's hit list. Inappropriate, he called it. He's a very polite chap. It's 20 storeys high, it's got 160 flats, 4 penthouses, underground parking, a sauna, swimming pool and a tennis court. Every flat in the place was sold before the first brick had been laid, and if you're thinking of moving in on a resale, a one-bedroom flat will cost you up to £180,000. A penthouse with amazing views like this, well, that could set you back £1 million or more. I'll tell you what, you pays your money and you takes your choice. Expensive addresses like Cascades have been taken over by a new breed of East Ender, and these latest arrivals are bringing with them a different style of living. If traditional corner shops are now difficult to find, the East End is adapting to delicatessens. You won't find jellied eels here. The new East Ender is stylishly dressed, well-heeled, and yes, it's true, he really does drive a Porsche. You see him all over the place. But maybe this is why. Now, how about this for the ultimate freebie? Buy now while stocks last. The new East Ender will entertain business clients from time to time on a floating restaurant, thanks to his expense account, of course, and very nice too. It's all good high-powered stuff. Or is it? Some of the long-time locals are objecting, not only to the new East Ender, but to the new East End. What do you think of it all?
Well, not much, really. Although I think it's for the best myself, but our Georgie don't.
Right. Why's that, Georgie?
Well, because it ain't for us.
Who is it for, then?
Someone who's got a few bob, like a few £1 million. Because if you want to buy a house, I mean, it's what, £225,000 to buy a house? And I mean, there's not many people on the island that I know of, certainly the old islanders, who's got £250,000 tucked in their back pocket.
I find none of the building that's going on is for the indigenous population. It's all for the newcomers and whatever. And while I recognise that we're all going to have to live here together, they've got to recognise that there are local people here to be looked after as well.
I mean, hasn't this development brought jobs and money into the area?
Because for the rich, yeah. But not for the likes of us. Everybody I know, I mean, factories knocked down, everybody's out of work. It's bought nothing at all but aggro, disaster, dirt, dust, noise. That's all it's bought for us.
Local groups say that you haven't listened to them. You've moved in and destroyed their environment. Now, what do you say about that?
Well, what I'd first of all say about that is that their environment was destroyed when the docks left. I think that's the important thing to remember, to think back 20 or 30 years when this was a thriving dockland community. The finest docks in the world were here in London. Now, that left, and that was a disaster for the local area. That was what destroyed their community, and that was what destroyed their environment. What we've been doing is trying to rebuild that. It's been a tough job. Only a few years ago, this place was derelict and without hope. We've now got 20,000 new jobs back, the first 10% of those which are coming. We have 15,000 new houses. Very substantial achievements there. New shopping, new recreation facilities. It's coming together. It's a controversial development. Clearly, we can't please everybody all the time.
Charles Neville is architectural correspondent of the Times and has closely followed the Docklands development. It seems to me that there's no rhyme or reason to planning in Docklands, so I asked him what he thought.
Well, there's no strategic plan, let's put it like that. The Development Corporation has been anxious to get money in here as quickly as possible to get the area off the ground. It's been very pragmatic, you could say. There hasn't been any real overall strategic planning. This has meant that anybody can come in with any sort of scheme, and that is why it's so piecemeal. There's no overall theme, use of materials, height, scale, colour, etc.
And what about the standard of the architecture? Is it high?
It's very mixed, I would say. Some schemes are very good, others are absolutely appalling. Unfortunately, some of the new newspaper industries here, for example, the new Daily Telegraph building, I think adds absolutely nothing to the area. It's got no associations with the East End or with a Docklands setting. I think that's very disappointing. There's an opportunity that's been missed, and without a proper planning policy for this part of London, things can only get worse rather than better.
You could say that a lot of these buildings could be sort of renovated as opposed to sort of flattened and built up again, and thus try to retain some of the character of the place.
Yes, I think many of the best pieces of architecture here are in fact the old dock warehouses which have been restored very often for use as residential accommodation. And those that have remained are very appealing, I think. There's a great contrast, though, in some of the new buildings we see around us here, which are glass and steel, perhaps 20 stories high, as at Cascades, just over the way there, which are totally out of character, and certainly I would have nothing to do with if given the choice.
Well, it seems to me with Cascades that they made some attempt to make it look nautical. To me, it looks like the Titanic sinking, actually. It's got portholes in it and all that.
Well, yes, indeed. I'm not sure if it's nautical or comical, but yes, it's certainly an unusual-looking tower.
Dr. David Owen has lived in Docklands for 24 years. What does he make of it all?
I don't think anybody's begun to realise how significant, how vast Canary Wharf is. It's going to put a terrible strain on the road system for a while.
That's a big building, that. Is it one of the tallest buildings in Europe?
It's going to be the tallest building in Europe. It's going to pack in thousands of people. It's going to create jobs, but it's going to really act as a magnet. The whole of this area of Docklands is just simply going to be transformed. I think, on balance, for the better. They're doing some things badly. The London Docks Development Board is much criticised, but in terms of commercial development, it's been a great success. Social development, patchy.
We're talking about a development which is going to employ 50,000 people just in one development. And it's going to put Docklands very much on the map. It's going to draw the centre of gravity of the financial world of London eastwards and make East London very much part of the next century when it comes to financial services. Good news for local people because the jobs spin off.
Providing that you can find the skilled labour in the area, I mean, is there any sort of plans to go out of their way to employ local people? Or is
Very much so. And Canary Wharf in particular has made a commitment to employ 2,000 local people, an actual commitment, a contractual commitment. And for every job that they fail to do, there's a penalty of about £7,000 which they're going to invest in local training.
While all these changes are going on, let's not forget the East End's traditional housing, nor the people who live in it. This is the Chapel House estate on the Isle of Dogs, as pleasant an area as you'll find anywhere in London. But some tenants in other parts of the East End aren't quite so fortunate. Local authorities have slowed down or even stopped their housing programmes, and much of what is now left is run down, vandalised, neglected, or these days, sold off. Right at the top of this block of flats overlooking Victoria Park, you'll find Hester Mallin. Now, Hester's lived in the East End all her life and has been in high-rise blocks for 20 years. She must like them. Like lots of people living in flats, Hester has a small patio. But unlike most, she's transformed her patio into a glorious splash of colour.
Come on, Joe, let me show you my estate. My golden acres. Actually, it's 4 feet wide by 18 feet long. But as you can see, I can pack an enormous amount into such a tiny space because I'm doing several tier gardening. You have plants on the wall, plants on benching that I made long ago, plants on the ground, and wherever there's space, I'll stand a shrub on 2 adjacent containers. So I get 4-level gardening. The disadvantage is that you're fighting the elements. You're not really in town as you are when you garden on the ground. At 22 floors up, with no buildings to break up the force of the wind, you are in fact gardening on top of a hill. It's a 12-month garden. There's no point in going to the trouble and the thought of working out how to garden on the 22nd floor and then just having something which is in flower for a few months of the year. So I have plants which appear in every season of the year, and it's always beautiful and it's always interesting, and it's usually always fragrant because I do love fragrant plants.
And it's always, I would think, very, very pretty. For those locals who've lived here all their life and haven't got a hope in hell of paying 100,000 quid or more for a flat, I am here to tell you that all is not lost, because right here on the river, the local people, the Cockneys, are building their own places for a fraction of the yuppified price. This sign announces a really clever do-it-yourself scheme which people anywhere could copy. A group of locals bought this plot of land from the Development Corporation, and they've turned a flat patch into what will become their own village community overlooking the Thames. The scheme was thought up by Dr. Michael Barraclough.
The point about this development is that each family actually dreams his house. Every house is individually designed. And the group as a whole determines the layout. They choose their architect, they appoint their various consultants, they choose the quality of materials they'll use. So there are all sorts of differences between developer-built housing. I mean, apart from it being personal and varied, the houses tend to be about 150 square foot bigger. And they build them for about a third of the cost. I mean, these houses here will cost about £42,000 to £45,000, the bigger ones. Whereas just down the road, houses which are actually quite a bit smaller are selling for 120 to 150,000.
There are 5 self-build projects in the East End now, and I think it's right that the Development Corporation, with so much land under its control, should help the local people to help themselves. Perhaps developers have got a conscience after all. I'd like to see more of it. They are the sound of progress. Well, if you ask me, in 10 years' time, Docklands won't be known as Docklands at all. They'll be calling it New London. Despite what the planners and the experts might say, this will be an entirely separate city, making London's third, if you count Westminster and the square mile of the City of London itself.